Hello, this is Chris Callahan with University of Vermont Extension Agricultural Engineering. In this next video, we're going to talk about installing the panels, building a vestibule, and thinking about winter storage for spotted wing Drosophila netting on a post and wire trellis. So let's just get reoriented. We've got about a half-acre blueberry planting here at the berry patch in Stephentown, New York. This is what it looks like when it was just about done. There's a high tunnel just to the north of this patch, but what we're really focused on is the netting, the area enclosed by the netting right here. And so what we're going to start to get into now is thinking about the actual netting panels. There are 6 of them in this installation, and they're shown here, roughly outlined in yellow and numbered. What you're maybe not seeing real clearly are that there are 2 vertical panels, number 1 and number 6, that kind of go up the north and south side of the planting. The others you can see there, the 4 others you can see. And at each point between the panels, each panel is made up of 2 sub-panels that are actually sewn together. And so there's a sewn seam here on the wider panels. That just makes it so that you can cover a greater span with a single panel. And where those 2 sewn panels come together, there are zippered seams. And the zippered seams were done to make installation and actually disassembly and storage for winter a little bit easier. So we'll get into that. It is a little strange to get used to thinking about zippered seam. And the zippered seams also have these grommeted sections as well, and you can see the black, there's a black sort of edge there, and with grommets in them, and we'll get into that in just a minute to see how those come together. So again, we have 6 panels total for this installation. There's a combination of zippered seams and sewn seams, and the zippered seams are what end up coming apart for winter storage. So just to review what we've got, we have posts and wires, and on the right hand side here we have our panels ready to come on. So what we're going to do is start to bring those in and over the wires that are strung between the posts, just like that. And before we do that, we do want to, we found, well, Dale Isla found anyway, that putting a little bit of split poly pipe over that leading cable that we draw the netting up and over seems to help ease that transition. There's a little bit of a point here of stress where the panel goes over that wire, and so having this in place before pulling the panel over is helpful. So something to think about. This is what it looks like up close. That's over the leading cable on one end. The other thing to think about is all of these cable clamps that we put in to install the cables and onto each post. You can see this is a good example of something that we'd like to avoid. It's a little hard to avoid having the bolt end of these cable clamps pointing up, especially when you get close to these metal posts. So what you might want to do is come back in and pad and duct tape all of these potentially sharp edges. You know, and what you need to get used to thinking about is the netting moves. It has lots of vibrations in the wind, and so even something that doesn't seem sharp over 1,000 or tens of thousands or even 1,000,000 cycles is going to start to wear at that netting. So we want anything that the netting is sitting on to be relatively smooth and just sort of easy for it to glide over. Okay, so how do we actually get the netting deployed? So you can see our post and wire structure in the background here, already waiting for the netting. This is how we get the netting. It comes on a roll, and you can see sort of this cardboard spool on the center. And what we found is putting a piece of piping through that center spool and supporting it, in this case with a ladder on the right-hand side and the back of a golf cart on the left-hand side, just getting it off the ground a little bit, having somebody mind it as it comes off the roll, and having other people pull it down where you're headed with it, down, in this case, away from the camera. and just get it laid out, at least for this this first section, which is going to come down to the ground, start at the ground, and go up to the top of this kind of vertical or semi-angled first section. So this is what it looks like from above. You can see that we've got about 3/4 of the net rolled out off the roll and going down in between the high tunnel and the planting for this first section, the number 1 panel. And somebody, we have, in this case, we have one person on the far end pulling it along, another person midway, just making sure it's not getting hung up on anything as we go down this sort of tight spot between the high tunnel and the berry patch. The next thing we need to think about is how we're going to attach the panels. And I mentioned before that there are black plastic sections with grommets, and then there are zippered seams. So the way we secure the panels to the wiring is with, in this case, a hog ring. This little piece inside what looks like a set of pliers is a hog ring. And it comes just like this. It's open. And these pliers are spring-loaded to sort of hold that hog ring in place, so that with one hand you can lift it up, and when you squeeze the hog ring pliers, it deforms that hog ring to the point where it becomes a triangle. So these two open-ended pieces end up coming together and overlapping, and it's a way of connecting two grommets together in this grommeted section. It's a little bit closer view of that. And again, the zippered section is above the post, above the wire. The grommeted connection is below the wire. And so the wire is sort of getting trapped between the zippered section and the hog rings. And you can see this getting deformed as we close the pliers on it. The hog ring becomes more of a triangle. This is a clip showing Greg on the left just holding a little bit of tension on the netting as Greg on the far right, different Greg, is attaching a hog ring. Don in the middle is taping up some of the cable clamps we talked about, and he's also going to find a hog ring and hog ring pliers and attach a hog ring at that post, at the near side of that post. Both Don in the center and Greg on the right are on ladders, and so you'll find you get into sort of a flow of things here, and you can minimize the number of ladder moves like they're doing. This is what it looks like once you've done that. Again, there's a zippered section. You can just barely make it out here in the upper left corner and follow it all the way along. There's a zippered seam that's above the post and above this wire. And then the hog rings are bringing the grommets together on the wire. So the hog rings both go through a grommet and also attach to the cable to keep the netting firmly in place on the structure. Later on, partly as a result of our trial at the berry patch, the hog rings they take a little getting used to. They take a fair bit of hand strength to use. And the other thing is, because we're taking this netting structure down, or at least putting it into quote unquote on cable storage for the winter, we would be clipping hog rings every season and then putting new hog rings in for those seams. And so one idea we had was using carabiner clips, spring-loaded carabiner clips, and that's become the standard now. So instead of using hog rings, you would use these carabiner clips to attach the same exact way, but with something that's a little bit easier to handle as a seasonal tool. So here's Greg and Delilah starting to attach the bottom grommet section of this panel on the north side to the bottom cable. So they'll be going along here and attaching that. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that the bottom has been attached, and then we're starting to loosely attach the top. And this is a really important step to think about. There's a tendency to want to go through and do every grommet hole as you're going down. And I'd really suggest just doing it loosely at first, maybe every fourth or fifth one. Pull the netting so it's tight but not too tight, between posts, for example, and between where cables intersect. Because if you connect on one side of the cable, it will not slip past, and you may find you actually need a little bit more at the end, etc. So do a loose fit first, check it, and then go back and add in hog rings or carabiner clips, depending on the specific scene. So this is the berry patch with that first panel in. This is panel 1 now installed. Loosely, you can see that it's not perfectly taut, but we have it generally coming together as a first panel. So then we start adding panel 2, and the way these go on, the subsequent panels, is you go over the top wire, so you are working overhead, and that there are some tools we came up with to help with that. This is just 2 sections, I think roughly 10-foot sections, maybe 8-foot sections of PVC, teed together with an extension arm, and that's just used to help sort of push the netting up and over cables as we go. We use the same basic setup with a spool through the a pipe through the center spool, strung between 2 things that keep it up off the ground. Ladders come in very handy. Again, you're working up and overhead. It's helpful to sort of tie a string around a bunch of the netting on one end. You can toss the string up and over the cable and have one person pull while the other pushes up on the netting with that T tool, just to help get it up and over cables. Once you get it pretty well strung out, the cables of the trellis system start to support the weight, and it does go pretty easily. This is an overhead view of some of the netting installation in progress. You can see it doesn't need to be spread out as you go. Just get it in place, and then make sure you're lining up the zipper numbers with according to the adjacent section. There is a specific order in which these panels go in, and a specific direction in which they go in. Another view of the pulling of the netting panel. You can see Delilah pulling on the string, which has been sent up and over the second to last cable, and somebody helped pushing the netting over the third to last cable, just to get it over that. Another view here of the second to last panel, just loosely laid in. You can see somebody's actually starting to put in the last panel coming down from the other end, that sort of angled last panel. So just getting things in loosely, and then we'll button it up in a minute. Sort of a final view, and this is a good view of what the zipper and grommets seams actually look like when they're just sort of loosely installed. You can see that these 2 panels have been zippered together. That's the very sort of stark white seam here. That's a zippered seam. And underneath it, you can see 2 black strips of grommet holes that haven't had every single one of them closed up and attached to cable. But it just gives you a good sense of how this looks as it's getting installed. And then this is what it looks like once you've installed all the hog rings or carabiner clips. You want to have this fairly frequently connected to the cable. That's where it gets its uplift protection, so that when a big wind comes along, the netting stays attached to the structure. Nice view of what a finished seam looks like. You can see that every grommet hole has some connection to the cable, and then when you get to posts, the post tops, you sort of have to go sort of split around them, and that can be a little bit of a trick, and it's also why it's best to sort of lay this out loosely first and work from one end, tightening it up as you go down the line. This is an image of essentially the entire planting closed in. You can see though there's several sections where the grommet rings have not been put in. This is also prior to us doing anything sort of final for the baseboard attachment. So we've got some sandbags and some planks just holding those edges down. You can see the baseboard behind the netting, and eventually we ended up wiggle wiring um, the netting into that baseboard for a positive seal. The other thing you'll see here is a vestibule. So this is, think of this as like an airlock. Delilah has found this to be really important just to sort of protect against the potential human error of someone leaving the door unzipped or open. So you need to zip this door and get into the vestibule, close that, and then zip the main door into the space, into the netted area. And so this is, I think, the first generation vestibule that Delilah used. They subsequently went to a larger vestibule to just make it give a little bit more space. So it takes up this full bay now, I believe, and allows for lawnmower and other equipment to get in as well. So we may do another video just on vestibules because it does seem to confuse people what's going on there. But it's essentially two netted structures coming together in one. So for winter storage, what we end up doing is only breaking two of the zippered seams, or two of the grommeted seams. It's the seam between section panels 2 and 3, and then between 4 and 5. And then you can see the white arrows show you where the panels end up. And we end up with just three rolls of panels hung up on the cable for winter storage. So it's panels 1 and 2 go on this northernmost cable. Panels 3 and 4 go on the center cable, and panels 5 and 6 go on the southernmost cable. This is what it looks like once those panels are pushed to those three cables and wrapped in black plastic for UV protection and just winter storage, protection from rodents. Important to make sure these ends are pretty well sealed to prevent nesting, and etc.